Yes, we've got 2 days of really good sessions, hopefully. Lots of talks with lots of people contributing, and also lots of discussion going on as well. So hopefully everyone, if you're not had the chance to meet outside already, will get a chance to meet everybody else over the course of the 2 days. Yeah, let's go to the next slide, if we can. Thank you very much. This conference has come together fairly quickly, I would say, especially in the last couple of days. But we basically, I can't remember who started the idea now, but sometime before Christmas came up with an idea to organise another bioacoustic conference in the UK and to try and make it focused on the applied use of acoustics and not be just a scientific conference, but actually talk about how we can take all that good scientific research that's been done by lots of people in the room and lots of other people, and actually start applying it to practical applications to do with ecology, nature conservation, landscape management, whatever else it might be. We are going to talk a little bit today about species-based approaches, and we're also going to talk tomorrow, I think, about sort of more general ecoacoustic soundscape uses as well. That follows an introduction to hardware and software and study design and that sort of thing this morning, and the end of the second day tomorrow will be looking at what guidance we have for applied use of acoustics, whether we've got enough of that, whether we need more of it. I've got a strong view in one way, which you'll probably come to hear, and start to try and develop some acoustic guidelines, which Ollie is going to talk about, which is sort of a twin track thing that's going on with this conference organisation, and one of the reasons for doing the conference in the first place, to get some more guidance out there. Thank you. Next slide. That's bright. I shouldn't have made the bottom of the screen white, should I? So, strong plug right now for the organisation that supports and is funding the conference. So, the UK Acoustics Network Plus, acoustics.ac.uk, is a national organisation that supports acoustic research and work and is free to join. And it has a bioacoustics special interest group, which Mark, one of the conference organising team, is coordinator of, as well as Ollie and
yes, Helen Whitehead.
Helen Whitehead from Salford as well,
and Paul Lepper.
And Paul Lepper. So 2 old geezers and 2 early career researchers, both on that, organising that, and they have helped organise and help fund the conference. So if you are not already a member, please just go onto the website. You might notice the blue arrow that points at the sign up here a bit, and go sign up. It's free, gets you on the mailing list, and you can take part in discussions online, attend conferences and other events.
Grant apps coming up.
Yes. So this was grant funded, and there's a second round big grant fund coming up. Well, I don't know if it's big, it's fairly sizable. Grant fund coming up in sort of August, September time. So if you are looking for grant funding for research projects or organising conferences or producing ecoacoustic guidelines, then I'd recommend you take a look at that. Good, strong plug there. Please do that over the course of the next couple of days. Sessions I've covered, breaks, food, we'll be having some breaks and we'll be having some food. Coffees you've no doubt already found. Is the food going to be out there as well?
Yeah, just at the end.
Okay. We are going to be moving around between rooms a little bit. Is it next door or is it upstairs on 311?
It's quite a trek. We'll have to lead people there.
Okay, so we'll form a posse and crocodile and go up to room 311 on the 3rd floor for some of the extra sessions when we split. Hugh has thankfully done all the housekeeping bits for me apart from that. If you have got any queries in terms of the conference organisation or whatever, then the organising committee is Hugh. You've met me, Alice down there, and Ollie is the organising committee, the one-man organising committee.
And Mark's here tomorrow.
And Mark Holderide is turning up tomorrow as well. And David helping out on technical stuff as well. Yes. very much needed. Cool. I think that's that for that. And then
just online housekeeping. If we can use the chat for questions to the speakers and for any emergency requests for help, or if we've mucked up sound or visual, and use the Slack channels for general conversations. So that's for people that are in the room as well. We're trying to make it as interactive as possible with people that are online. So if you can check the Slack channel and have conversations regularly as well, that's great.
Cool. Next slide, please. Sponsors, I mentioned some of these already. So thank these people for your cheap entry tickets and the food that's arriving. So Bioacoustics, SIG, the Early Career SIG, Manchester Metropolitan University, of course, University of Sussex have stumped up some cash as well to help things. And as I said, yes, big thanks to Ollie for pretty much organising the whole thing single-handed. So go and shake his hand and buy him a beer later. Yes, not too many beers. We need him tomorrow. So a couple of other things just to finish off. We've got a hashtag for social media types, UKAN Biodiversity, if you want to tweet or whatever. We have publicised a Survey Monkey questionnaire that's gone out. We've had about 60 responses so far, but there's about 160 people on the conferences. So if you haven't yet, at some point today, ideally, could you please go onto the Survey Monkey, the address you've already had by email, so no excuses for not being on screen, and answer those. We'll be using the outputs from that in terms of what you think makes a good eco-acoustic survey protocol. We'll be talking about that tomorrow and presenting the results from there, and it'd be good to have as many results as possible. The Slack account, you've hopefully, or everyone's had that already as well, so please take part in the discussions there. There's a hello channel, there's a general channel, and then there's a channel for each of the 4 sessions that we've got this morning, this afternoon, tomorrow morning and afternoon as well. So please take part in the discussions on that. And a plug for Stack Exchange as well. There's a few people around the world who have been developing a bioacoustic Stack Exchange. If you've not used it before, I imagine a lot of people in the room have used Stack Exchange quite a lot for sourcing all of their R code probably and other stuff. That's what I use it for. There is the new Bioacoustics Q&A channel, Stack Exchange account, whatever it's called, has just been set up there, and they're looking for more people to contribute questions and provide answers within that. So it will become a pretty major resource for bioacoustics researchers and users in coming years, no doubt. And have I got one more, or is that it?
That's it.
That's it.
I'll do one for Ollie or Dave here. In my head, your role ain't working. How do I get on the Wi-Fi?
There should be a guest Wi-Fi account. There's
Manchester Met and MANT Wi-Fi.
That's it. If you click on that, it should then open a browser, and you just click connect on that browser. It's like a pink button, and that's free Wi-Fi for any guest MMU.
Thank you very much.
Cool. And if anybody in the room is on Teams, yes, please keep your mics and speakers off, because we're going to get feedback through the various speakers and microphones that are set up around the room, etc., etc. And I think that is me done. Is there any questions so far on the 2 days? I'm hoping no. Good. It is a no. So, Kate Jones is in the room. Professor Kate Jones from UCL, the Centre for Biodiversity and Environmental Research. I'm hoping I've got that right, and is a well-known bioacoustics researcher. Did interesting projects like the London Parks bats during the London Olympics, etc., etc., etc. But I'm sure she's going to fill us all in that. So hopefully we get technology work.
Yeah.
Kate is on the screen.
Hello. Can everyone hear me? Oh, hold on. Sorry, just picking the right window. Can you see my slides? I can't see anyone now, so someone will just have to say yes.
Yeah, we can hear you and see you.
Great, thank you. Well, What an honour to give a keynote talk at this conference. I think this is my perfect conference. Really, I've been working in this field for a number of years, and it's just brilliant to see kind of explosion of interest in this and it coming together at this conference. So thanks very much for the invitation. I'm so sorry I can't be there. I'd already said I'd come down to Cornwall this week, so I couldn't make it in person, but joining you remotely. So hopefully this is the start of a regular thing. So I hope to be there again in the future. Okay, so in my talk today, I'm going to kind of give an overview. I've been asked to give an overview of the field, kind of setting the scene, outlining the critical need for ecosystem and species monitoring in the current climate, and then you know, arguing, it's just like preaching to the choir, but arguing that the bioacoustics is an incredibly useful tool in our arsenal. And then I'm going to take you through some emerging technologies that I think are really exciting, and then end on some challenges and opportunities for the future. So I hope that sounds exciting to people. Okay, so just to kick off then, there's a really increasing recognition of the critical dependency of human health and well-being, prosperity and happiness and everything on the natural environment. So, for example, you know, actions to protect, sustainably manage and restore natural ecosystems, such as kind of tree planting, mangrove restoration, they're really seen as to be important components of not just tackling the biodiversity crisis, but also tackling climate crisis as well as a number of other sustainable development goals, which are here on the left in that circle. So these are, you know, currently the current kind of vogue is to call these nature-based solutions, and they're really starting to form an important part of both international and national targets and policies. So in this country, both the Climate Change Act and the recently passed Environmental Act, well, I can't remember what it's called, the Environmental Act, they have or will have in the future targets to ensure sustainable ecosystems and wildlife populations. So basically there's going to be this really increasing need to scale up ecological monitoring in order to first know whether these targets have been met, but really importantly, how to know what works and to adapt accordingly. So adaptive management of these kinds of actions. So in the UK, we have an amazing army of people who volunteer their time to monitor species and ecosystems. That's just amazing. And you can see from this example here how many groups, literally thousands and thousands of volunteers here represented. And they were all involved in producing data which went into the State of Nature report, so the latest one a couple of years ago now. So this involvement is incredibly important because of the scale of monitoring that's required and now and into the future. But there, you know, we're really lucky in the UK, and you know there are some other parts of the world that also have that kind of engagement with people. But there are many countries for many reasons that people do not have this level of engagement and interest in monitoring nature. And in order to deliver on those global goals that I showed you, but also our national policy targets, we need to rapidly scale up our approach. And I love this slide, I show it everywhere, but I work a lot with engineers from industry, and I came across this infographic, and I really felt it really summed up where we are in conservation and ecological monitoring. So it kind of describes 4 industrial revolutions from, you know, steam engines and the Satanic mills of Lancashire. And then it kind of goes on to kind of mass production, Industry 2.0, like a Ford factory, for example, assembly lines. And then into kind of Industry 3.0, where we've got robots, computers, like a modern car factory, for example, some robots. And then into Industry 4.0, which is these cyber physical systems. So that really just literally means robots which are kind of reacting to the environment. They're intelligent. They use predictive models to know what and when to order. So things like Amazon warehouses are kind of like this. So if I use this framing to compare where I think ecological monitoring is, biodiversity monitoring is around the world, I would say that we're probably in 2, some still in 1, thinking about citizen science, but I think we're probably in 2, maybe 3, but certainly not 4. And I think we really do need to scale up. And that's not to denigrate any of the kind of huge numbers of people that are contributing their records. That's not to denigrate them at all. They're amazing volunteers, but just at the kind of scale that we need to do something else and need to add on to that. So I'll kind of go through some of the how we could possibly, or some of the examples of using 3 and 4.0 kind of technologies to help this effort. And I'll go through some of those promising emerging examples, which I think are really super exciting, and many of which have been done by people on this call. So that'd be quite funny. All right, so let's just start with thinking about Earth observation monitoring. So the argument could be, you know, well, we could use satellites to do this. Why do we need ground-based sensors? And there's a really kind of exciting body of evidence growing that that this type of monitoring only provides some of the information that we need, and you know, some of these, this paper here in 2015 showed that the satellite image from the 2 on the far right were showing similar canopies, but of course they were emptying forests, and you wouldn't have picked that up from Earth observation data. So it's not really enough to have to think about this. So there was another study in 2020 that they used the Living Planet Index. So this is guys from ZSL used the Living Planet Index and associated. So Living Planet Index is a whole time series of population data across the world and in different populations. And they used that, they correlated that to remote canopy cover to find very little correlation between the average rate of wildlife population change and the tree cover trend over that study period. So obviously these are kind of new studies which need to be verified, but that I think there is a growing recognition or growing evidence is suggesting that we do need both of these things to actually capture the information that we need. Okay, so the kind of measuring the kind of these ground-based sensors, using these ground-based sensors and using acoustics to do that is kind of fast emerging as an incredibly powerful tool, and currently has been deployed over a huge number of different habitats and for different species. So terrestrial environments, that includes birds and bats, amphibians, insects, even trees, trees and soil I saw the other day. And there's aquatic environments as well for mammals, fish, coral reefs. So there's the growing kind of number of different species it's being used for. And this lovely image is from a review from one of my old PhD students, now postdoc, Ella Browning, on the WWF Conservation Tech series. So it's kind of a set of guidelines there for understanding how to monitor ecosystems acoustically. So this kind of interest in acoustics as a monitoring tool is in no small part due to the rapid technological developments in computing hardware that we've seen, particularly in microphones. So these MEMS microphones, these microelectrical mechanical systems, are expanding in quality and availability. And this also means this lowers the cost significantly. So this is a graph from a tech review that one of my PhD students, Ben Williams, did, and his colleagues from Exeter. So they looked at the type and the cost of acoustic sensors which are currently being used. So this kind of just shows how the tech development has changed the type of sensors now available and the cost of sensors, as particularly for terrestrial sensors. So these have completely lowered. And one of these bits of kit which has been extraordinary is the audio moth. And this was done by Alex Rogers' team and a number of his colleagues in Oxford. And this is really innovative and really kind of groundbreaking and broke the mold really, and in understanding how you could do open design and open source design for the sensor and make it completely very cheap and very available. And I think that's really transformed what we can do now and the scale at which we can do it. So Alex, I think you're brilliant. So in this review as well, Ben looked at you know, where the aquatic system was, and it's kind of really far behind where the terrestrial system is in terms of the costs and the availability of these sensors. I mean, I think their argument really is that it costs so much to go out on these boats when you're monitoring these places that, you know, having an extra $2-5 grand sensor doesn't really matter. But I think that opening it up is a really important thing to do and to lower these costs. So Ben and his colleagues started to look at using audio moths underwater. So developed a new case with Alex's team and now called Hydra moths, of course. And you know, compared them to the original sound traps, which are these really expensive but very good sensors. So you know, they were kind of looking to see whether you can really compare them, and on surface value anyway from this review, they found some really good correlations between what you can hear in this sound trap and what you can hear and see in the spectrograms in that new Hydra moths. So it's not just in hardware that this has been an explosion of advancements, but in new analytics. And new algorithms are being developed which compare new data against examples from a library of known species in order to ID them. So generally this is called machine learning, or you know, it's just a regression model, but it's usually called machine learning or artificial intelligence, depending. And it's the same, basically the same principle as the voice recognition systems in your phone or visual recognition systems from the cameras. So these have been developed for a number of different species now. And we, with Rory Gibb, who's a postdoc with me, he reviewed this in 2019 to look at the kind of state of the field. And basically, you know, I'm just giving an example with bats, but there's lots and lots of other ID systems out there. So you basically transform the raw data into a less data-rich visualization, like a spectrogram. And then after isolating the signals here in the panel C, you can either measure some of these spectral features, so like frequency band or peak frequency, and then use those features in a you know, regression model, a boosted regression model, or a random forest analysis or something like that, to understand and then predict what species you have given those parameters. But newer techniques like deep learning, which is a way basically to get the algorithms to look at the image in the spectrogram in total and pick out and work out what are the best parameters. So there's no measuring when you're doing deep learning. You're kind of giving it all of the data to then classify it into a different species, or the species that you know, trying to ID the species from the unknown data. So deep learning approaches are exploding. You know, there's so many different approaches that they're using now. But you know, these are shown to be much more powerful. But you do generally need quite a lot of data to do these. But there are advances in this, in thinking about how you how do you minimize the amount of data that you need, and these are called few-shot learning techniques, and these are really kind of very, very new at the moment, and working out how to use those is going to be really important. Okay, so there are these increasingly sophisticated AIs for species ID, and I just mentioned a few of these, and I'm sorry if I haven't mentioned your favourite one, but these are two which I use a lot. So there's one by Kaleidoscope Wildlife Acoustics, which does bat ID, and you can actually do it on the phone by plugging in a microphone, or you can use your phone as a microphone for bird calls. And my favourite one at the moment is Merlin. So this is by the Cornell Lab. It's extraordinary. It's just really brilliant. So you should go and have a look at those. So there's another one called Birdnet, and I mentioned Birdnet here because it's, unlike the other two, it's open source, and you can download it from GitHub and apply it onto your own devices if you want. So I think that's another kind of aspect of this is having more open source technologies and algorithms rather than behind some kind of paywall, or having closed source code, so you don't really know what it's doing, or you don't really know how good it is. Okay, so at the moment there are a number of different libraries, but not enough, and that's what's really holding us back, I think, in terms of development of these AIs. And this is just some work that my PhD student Santiago has been putting together. So this is in prep at the moment, so it may change, so don't tweet it. But he's been thinking about the importance of libraries and kind of annotations of those libraries. So once you get the call, it's a huge amount of effort to actually record this blasted thing in the field, and then get the right ID and everything, and get the right equipment. And then you've got your work hasn't finished, because then you've got to curate it and annotate it for these machine learning algorithms to use. So there's a lack of kind of annotation tools at the moment, and understanding what types of annotations are more useful than others. And so he was experimenting with different types of annotations for bat calls, either just very fine scale, like tracing the call in a spectrogram, or just blocking it out, or putting at the start of the call, or putting a bounding box around it. So he was finding, this is the graph on the right, he was just finding that, when you've got few examples, fine scale annotations are really important. But as you get more recordings per species, just blocking it, it matters less how you annotate it. So I think that's a really important kind of thing to know when we're starting to build these libraries and annotations. The next really thing then is just thinking about pulling all of this together to think about how to use all of this then in an acoustic monitoring program. So, there are a number of acoustic monitoring programs, and I think when I talk about monitoring, I don't just mean a survey, I mean monitoring over time. And I think those are things which are going to be really important in trying to understand, the success of nature-based solutions and biodiversity net gain, for example, as policy levers. So I think it's really important to start to think about the design of these acoustic monitoring programs and pull all this together. So it's really exciting that this is we're getting more and more of these acoustic monitoring programs, but they're pretty few on the ground at the moment, but hopefully this will grow over time. And the one I just wanted to highlight was one that we've been involved with, thinking about developing the open source AI for UK bats. So we've been collecting bat calls with the Bat Conservation Trust, annotating these, and then developing our libraries and deep learning algorithms. So we have been thinking about how to apply those with the Bat Conservation Trust into this new British Bat Survey. So where you have volunteers having a location, they're being sent out or buying an audio moth, and then it would upload those data, and then we would process those data with our algorithms. So I think there are a number of different ones going on now, and I think that's really, really, really exciting. Okay, so because of these libraries being a problem, there's also been a lot of interest in Soundscape analytics using acoustic indices, which are usually defined as, they're kind of some measure of activity in a spectrogram, so that you can, try and pull out some of the information in the spectrogram without really knowing what's in there. And these measures are typically, well, not all of them, but typically, you know, they can't distinguish between the different sounds. So it could be rain, or it could be a motorbike, or it could be a plane, or it could be a wren. So they wouldn't. It's all about activity and in the spectrogram. These have got lots of positives because you don't have to have a library of calls. You're just looking at, you know, amount of activity over time in a call, in a recording. Sorry. But there are some problems. In this paper that Alison Fairbrass, who's an old PhD student of mine now, postdoc, she was looking at whether you could apply these in a really urban setting. And mostly acoustic indices aren't applied in urban settings because they know that they're typically biased by anthropogenic sounds. So this was just showing that, you know, this is a real problem for some of them, and there are only a couple of indices which actually work without being biased by anthropogenic sound. So I'm usually pretty negative about acoustic indices, but my student Ben has just published this paper, amazing paper that he's been doing with audio moths on restored coral reefs. And one is, you know, he was looking across a gradient of degraded to healthy coral reefs in Indonesia, and also some ones which are newly restored and some restored for a couple of years. So he was using acoustic indices, because it's really difficult in the sea to actually get these libraries. But he was not just using one indices to kind of show to characterize the sound, but lots and lots and lots of them. So he used these to kind of like characterize what the sound was, using all kinds of these different takes on the system. So using lots and lots of different ones, he came up with this approach. And then this is just a kind of, it is a principal components analysis plot, but this is just showing you that, you know, he was picking out something that these acoustic indices are showing you, which describes the site, and he could get a good separation between degraded and healthy sites, but also excitingly newly restored ones and maturely restored for a long time. So I think, you know, and he was using machine learning then on these principal components to then understand whether you could tell from just listening to it whether it was newly restored or healthy or degraded coral reef. So I think that's really exciting. So have a look at his papers. I think it's really fabulous. So I was pretty damning about acoustic indices until I saw what he did with this by using multiple acoustic indices. So it's basically just trying to summarize what the site is in multiple means, which I think is a really interesting approach. Okay, so there are kind of AI-enabled acoustic indices now, which are really exciting. So this one is by Alison again from my group, and this is an AI which has been trained to understand whether it's an anthropogenic sound like a bike or a plane, or a bird, or a biological sound apart from humans. So this is something which we've applied over London to have a look at, you know, just the measure of anthropogenic sound versus biotic sound, which is a really interesting approach. So one is in the middle of, I think it was on our roof in our building in Bloomsbury, and one was in a much nicer part of town. Okay, so the kind of other things which you can do with these Soundscape analytics are kind of use this kind of principal components type approach or data reduction approach, and then pick out those features in the recordings and then false color the spectrograms so that those kind of different sounds are clumped together. So this is a full spectrogram analysis by Paul Rowe in Australia, in Queensland Institute of Technology. Sorry. So he's brilliant. He's set up all of these kind of acoustic observatory all over Australia. So this has just been kind of launched in the last couple of years, where he's got hundreds of these sensors listening to Australian biodiversity across the country. And he's been using these techniques because they don't have all the libraries that they need. So that's another kind of option. And another one is kind of using a kind of pre-trained network to, like Google has got a whole load of sounds that it's found from videos and the web, so that he's got this kind of acoustic library of just sounds. And then they've got a kind of a training set, which basically you can use as a pre-training set on any sound, so that you can pull out what it is a way to categorize what the sound actually, quantify what the sound is. And so these kind of Google pre-trained networks you can use to understand the differences between sites. So, for example, this is a study that we've been doing in Borneo with Sarab and some of his team. So we have been he's been putting acoustic sensors across a gradient of degraded and intact sites. So this is a big intact forest here, and then we've got different patches along the top here. And so you have a kind of gradient of degradation, and then using these kind of pre-trained networks to categorize what these things are, or what these soundscapes are. And so he's been showing that you can tell using these pre-trained networks what the kind of the biodiversity status is of those systems. And really excitingly, if you know what the area normally sounds like, you can detect if something has changed. So you can use these to detect anomalous sounds in the recording. So say you've put these sensors up and you have then heard a gunshot, for example, or a chainsaw, it will be picked up on that as something that's not normal from that site. So Sarab's been developing this kind of technology into more compact systems. So he's got these solar panels and these sensors which will upload onto servers, and now he's got these things called bugs, which you should have a look at, which I think are also fabulous to do these things. Okay, so there's like a growing number of these AI-enabled monitoring schemes, and that's really brilliant. And this is a page from Microsoft's AI for Earth website, just highlighting a few of these. And I think that's really fabulous. But, you know, in order to do this, it does require quite a lot of resources. So you have to have, you know, this is dealing with huge amounts of data. So you need the kind of computing resources that you need to process these data and store them. You need these AI models which are available that are accurate, or you know exactly what's happening and you can amend them and update them and understand how good they are and verify them. You know, in some ways you don't need as much expert knowledge when you're using these systems. So you have to be kind of careful that you're really understanding what you're measuring, and that's the relevant thing that you're measuring for this system. So they're kind of easy to deploy in some ways, but then knowing what they actually are saying is more tricky. Okay, so after that amazing whirlwind review, I don't know if it was amazing, but it was definitely whirlwind. So where are we? So I think I've shown there are some nice Industry 3.0 examples, but whether there are any 4, that's really tricky. So we put up, we started thinking about this a couple of years ago and used the kind of AIs that we have for bats and made some new sensors, these kind of smart sensors, which will not only listen constantly, but also do the processing on the sensor. So these were made from these Intel boards, which were processing the information and then displaying that back on a website. So that was a really cool kind of aspect of of monitoring. But to be really 4.0, you would also need to have some kind of intelligent reaction. So, for example, they could be linked to the lighting system, street light system, so dim it down when there's loads of bats or something. So in order to be really 4.0, we'd need to have that kind of interaction as well. Okay, so just to finish then, I just wanted to draw your attention to another kind of 4.0 or potential 4.0 thing, which is this Birdnet Pi. So basically it's Birdnet. So, you know, you can run Birdnet, download it from GitHub. So there's some sources there for you if you want to have a look at that. But also you can also attach it to one of these, which is a Raspberry Pi. I hope you can see that. And you can you know, put that Birdnet algorithm onto this Raspberry Pi, and then if you have a right enclosure, you can get it to do the analysis on this computer and then send it to a website. So you can start building up kind of sensor systems, you know, with remote AI happening on the boards. And that means you can do something like this, which is really cool. So go and have a look at this. So this is it's called Bird Weather. So it's these Raspberry Pi Birdnet Pi stations which have been set up, but also made public, and so you can see in real time all of the birds which have been identified on these new sensors. So these are just like 30 quid or something. So I mean these are like, it's an amazing kind of new age that we find ourselves in when we have these technologies. Okay, so just to conclude, there's a massive growing need to monitor ecosystem health and species abundance for the global and national targets. The current ground-based monitoring is not scalable or adaptive enough, and passive acoustics is a really important monitoring tool in our arsenal, and it's becoming widely used, and there are really exciting developments, and but many analytical and technological challenges remain. So on that note, if you find that you do want to use this and want to know how to put Birdnet on there or develop a better version of Birdnet or BatNet or whatever it is, come and do our master's courses at UCL. Thanks very much.
Okay, so I think this is back in the room,
Okay.
and we can't hear Kate anymore for the time being. Can people online hear the room again? And we're going to add an extra bit of complication with the mic in the room. So any questions for Kate from the audience? Anyone online? Alice is going to be monitoring those questions, and we'll ask them, and then we'll turn Kate's sound back on to answer and move around. So Carlos, can you?
I can do run.
Yes.
Very quick question. Hi Kate, that was amazing, thank you. Just a really quick question. You were talking about some new analytical approaches in CNNs. I missed the word that you actually used. What did you call them?
So CNNs are called convolutional neural networks, and there are some new techniques which try to use fewer labels, and these are called few-shot learning techniques. So they basically work by having pre-trained networks, which you then apply to those data. So how well they work is still to be investigated, but I think those are really exciting new advances, which are, I think that's where a lot of the activity is now, is trying to understand how you use these CNNs with very few labels, or how to harness all the labels we have in a way which helps us go forward. So there's one which is harnessing all the images from the internet for animals, and then has a kind of this kind of tool which is a pre-trained tool which you can then apply to, say, camera trap images, for example, that it hasn't seen before. So it does a fairly good job, but it's not perfect on some of the rare species. So I think that's always going to be a problem. So rare species that don't have very many labels, you don't have a library. That's always going to be a problem with any of these techniques. But it's a really growing, fascinating field.
Any online questions at all? There's one behind you, Carlos.
Thank you very much for that talk. It was fascinating. So I too work alongside engineers. I'm an engineer actually in the built environment and in acoustics. How receptive have you found the development world and the urban development world has been to the concepts you've been putting out there in terms of biodiversity and the impact of particularly things like construction work in the urban environment and how that has impacted species? How receptive have they been? How have you dealt with that challenge?
I think it's a really great question. I think a mixed response, really. I think people like Arup have got their kind of ecological teams all set up to do biological monitoring, and kind of getting them to move towards a more kind of high-tech approach. There are definite barriers, and I would say that it's not helped by the fact that a lot of this stuff is still not kind of professional enough for them to like pick up, put out in the field. So I say, yes, you can put a Raspberry Pi out in the field, but you know, in order to process those Birdnet algorithms, you need power. So how are you going to do that? You need a solar panel. Okay, is that going to work all the time? What about the housing? You know, so that there are things which really, and then network connection. So there are things that are really important which we haven't quite managed to solve yet. So I think there is a mixed response, but you know, I think they're becoming more and more aware of kind of climate change adaptation, which they do need to take care of, even if they don't care about biodiversity. So they do need to have those kind of targets in place, and things like biodiversity net gain they're more aware of. So I think there is I think it's changing, but I think it's slow, and I think we haven't quite got the off-the-shelf solution for them to pick up and take away. It's still a bit experimental, and I think there's a big gap there, I think, for off-the-shelf technologies that just work kind of plug and play, that they don't have to worry about. So like putting out those sensors in the Olympic Park was a total nightmare. Like, okay, you can put them out, but then you have to have a cherry picker and then a separate person to then put them up onto the lampposts, and then you have to monitor them all the time. So, you know, the network goes down, the box leaks. You know, they've been up for like 5 years now, you know, and it takes a huge amount of effort to maintain them. So we're not quite there yet, but I do think it's changing.
Back in the room. I think there's an online question from.
Yeah, so Kate can hear us. Yeah, there's an online question, Kate. Thinking about other network types of networks. CNN seems to be really popular, but in music information retrieval, often recurrent neural networks are used because then you can have a representation of time. That doesn't seem to be something that's occurring in this field at the moment. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, I think recurrent neural networks are definitely something we should be all looking at. I think at some point the problem that the algorithms are getting so great now that the problem will come down to us not having enough labels. So at some point it will be the fact that these are really good algorithms and they can be used. It's just we don't have the library. So if I would say one thing, I think we need to start to build up these gold standard libraries which are open source and everyone can use, and we can test these algorithms out with gold standard data sets where we can say, okay, we know it works this well, and we know that because of this data set that we have in our back pocket. You know, I think we need to invest a lot more on libraries and annotations, and you know, we're still going to have a problem with rare, and cryptic species, whatever we do, but that's true for any monitoring. But yeah, so recurrent neural networks, I think, brilliant, but I think it's it will come. The bottleneck will be enough libraries.
Thank you. And there's one more online saying, thank you very much for your great presentation. You can hear okay? Yes, you can.
Yeah.
How do you think we can overcome the limitations that AI has applied to ecoacoustics in terms of computing resources and the large data sets required?
I think we've got to put more effort into collecting new sets of data, new data sets, and curating those, and whether we can get some kind of organisational buy-in from the Natural History Museum, for example, or other organisations like that to curate these acoustic libraries. For the kind of computing resources, Amazon has got quite a good, and Google Labs have got quite good resources for people that can just kind of upload data and store data, and that's becoming much cheaper. So I think there are kind of third parties which you can, buy space and computing resources for. So I think maybe that's becoming less of a problem. I think one of the biggest issues that I see is ecologists not knowing how to do this stuff and being frightened by the technology or being frightened by the algorithms. I hated maths at school, absolutely hated it. And now this is what I do. It's not impossible to learn it. And, I love tinkering about with bits of crap. I built a whole camera trap. So it's really fun and it's really accessible, and I think that there's a really big skills gap in ecology, and I think that's why we set up those new masters, because we need to have that interaction with the AI people and computing and engineering people to actually help us build this new tech and new monitoring tools.